Welcome, everybody, to Highside, Lowside. My name is Zach, joined as always by my buddy Spurge. This is season 10, episode 7. Our topic today is the Honda Goldwing, a motorcycle icon if there ever was one. Also, Spurge and I do our first ever used bike showdown and getting your significant other to ride on the back. All that and more on this episode after a quick word from our sponsor.
So in these Motul conversations, we talk a lot about changing your engine oil. But what about your gear oil? What if you're out there on a shaft drive motorcycle burning up the miles and you haven't checked out your gearbox lately? That final drive system, that needs some attention. Well, luckily, Motul has a full line of gear oil products to make sure that your bike is running tip-top all the time. Even if you don't have a chain, Motul's got you covered with their high-end gear oil. To learn more about how Motul can help you from grinding your gears, head over to RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the Airbag Save page. RevZilla is dedicated to making sure that you are informed about all the newest safety technology coming down the pike, and the newest, most protective safety technology that we've seen in recent years is the evolution of airbag technology. So to learn about the entire line of airbag products and which one might be right for you and your ride, check out RevZilla.com/airbags. Now, on with the show.
Spurgeon Dunbar, we are back in the Highside, Lowside Thunderdome here, ready for another adventure. As we say, the inmates are in charge of the asylum. No guest today, everybody. It's just us.
So we decided, as we will be talking about all things Honda Goldwing today, that we should kick things off with the used bike showdown.
Yes.
Where Zach and I were both challenged to find our most interesting Honda Goldwing used motorcycles across the globe. I think we gave ourselves the Mississippi, not the globe, the United States. And Zach wasn't allowed to go west or east of the Mississippi. I wasn't allowed to go west of the Mississippi. And as I'm saying this, I don't know if Wisconsin's on the east of the Mississippi, so I should be okay. I believe.
I think you're safe. Yeah. So we're celebrating an icon today. We figured we would celebrate with a little classified search to see who can find the most appealing used Goldwing, since the motorcycle has been around for 50 long years, as we will talk about. Who's going first here? Do I go first?
You can go first. Yeah, and I think it's notable.
We haven't seen each other's picks, by the way.
Yeah, this is all fresh and new as we discover the picks of the other person. There's a lot of screaming deals if you want a really older Goldwing.
And that's where I would like to start. Spurgeon, feel free to click on the link that was provided to you by producer Chase. What you will see, along with the audience for the first time here, is a 1989 Honda GL 1500 Goldwing. It is in a lovely eggplant color. It has touring trims out the wazoo. It looks like it's got some fog lights. The ad reads, good condition, tires are good, runs and rides very nice. Newer timing belts and water pump, has all the features, stereo, air ride, cruise control, all works as it's supposed to, just not riding it enough.
Tape deck. It's got a tape deck. For all of your cassette tape needs,
which we'll get into some of the features that the Goldwing introduced. But I would just now it does have 110,000 miles on the clock, which is a lot. I'll come back to that. This motorcycle, the asking price, I know you've all been waiting, $1,800. And I just think that this is a lot of motorcycle, figuratively and literally, for $1,800. Like pound for pound, I'm not sure there's a better deal on the internet, because this is probably a 900-pound bike as it sits.
$2 a pound?
$2 a pound. I mean, that is a good deal. But also, you're going to get a lot of touring capability with this machine, Spurgeon, are you not? I mean, you got armrests on the passenger seat.
People used to say that if you were paying $1 per cc for a used motorcycle, you were getting a good deal, and then inflation came around, and people said it was dead. You couldn't spend $1 per cc.
But we're close here.
If you offered this individual,
you think
$1,500 for this 1989 GL 1500, you might be able to get this for $1 a cc.
Oh man, and I just think you got some pinstriping on there. You got a tape deck. Also, I would like to say two things. One, 110,000 miles. I
love
love to see high mileage on used bikes because that means they have been ridden and they have been loved. Also, maybe a slight pang of nostalgia for me because this is a spitting image of the model of Goldwing that Airy used to build the famous Winnebago for our CTXP Moto Motorhomes adventure. If you have not seen that, please do check it out on the YouTubes.
And if you think this is big and heavy,
you ain't seen nothing until you've seen the Winnebago. But of course, the Winnebago was not my creation or brainchild, but I was a part of its development and its maiden voyage. And I also took it on a ride to work for an episode of Daily Rider, which was probably the most terrifying episode of Daily Rider I've ever filmed. So this is that machine's, iconic, semblance. And I'll just go back to it. $1,500 cruise control, 1,500 cc's cruise control, luggage, $1,800. Come on.
At the time this bike was introduced, it was, the flagship of touring comfort. And now you look at it and you're just like, that's a big, heavy motorcycle.
I think it might still be a flagship in so much as it looks like it has some flagpoles. Oh no, those are probably CB radio antennas.
It's got
but
no less than three antennas off the back.
Okay. All right. So this is my pick. I just think it looks like a peach of a machine, and I'm not sure you can find a better deal. But Spurgeon.
Okay. So we will move on. Now, Zach thinks that his 1989 Goldwing is old, but I'm here to tell you that it's not nearly as old as the 1975 Goldwing that I found for $4,350. Now hold on. Now, when you first look at this ad, you think, I'm going to spend $4,300 on a 1975 Honda Goldwing? No, you're going to get two. It's $4,350 for a pair of 1975 Honda Goldwings.
They should have taken a picture of them next to each other so you understood you were getting two.
I'm telling you. So this is if you're looking, this is out in Wisconsin, and the seller prefers to sell them as a pair. No reasonable cash offers are going to be refused. Where did it say? Oh, my favorite. So we'll get into 1975 Goldwings here in just a minute, but you can get one of the bikes has 45,000 miles on it. One of the bikes has about 41,000 miles on it. And my favorite quote of this is, the front brakes are not great. They aren't the quote unquote, use your Flintstone style feet to stop the bike bad, but they're really not great. So that's
also, can I just say the next two sentences in full are, it needs new pads, period. The forks leak, period.
Yeah. So maybe it's just, front fork oil all over the front brakes. Maybe it's the lack of pads. You never know.
Right. Well, I gotta say, this is a screaming deal. And in some ways a great segue, to our discussion of the Honda Goldwing as an icon, because this is the first gen here, 1975.
Yeah.
So some good deals to be had, I think, is the point. So I didn't even share another one that I happened to trip over, which is out in Southern California here. It was It's a 2002 Goldwing with 40,000 miles on it. This is the 2002. So this is the fifth gen that we'll talk about later. You're talking 40,000 miles on this bike. It's cherry, great condition, silver. It's got all kinds of features. It's got heated stuff. It's got fog lights, and this is $5,500.
Second year of the fifth gen, and the fifth gen arguably introduces the modern era of the Goldwing, which we'll get into. But I want to. So let's skip.
I'm just saying there are lots of deals to be had. Lots of deals to be had. So if you're looking for a Goldwing, please don't be disheartened. There's so much to find and see.
Backing up just a second as we kind of transition in here. The main difference between the 75 Goldwing pair that I found for sale is back. That was back when the Goldwing was introduced. It was a big naked motorcycle. It was definitely something that was revolutionary at the time in 1975, but it still had not grown into by Zach's point in time in 1989. The Goldwing had expanded. It had a huge fairing, and it came with integrated luggage and top boxes and big backrests for your passengers. So in the 14 year span here between the pick for my used and the pick for Zach's, the Goldwing changed a lot. That's really what we're going to get into throughout this episode.
Indeed. So let's start in the present, just in case you don't know what a Goldwing is right now. A Honda Goldwing is an 850 pound, $30,000, 1800cc 6-cylinder engine shaft drive touring motorcycle. It is Honda's, to this day, flagship touring motorcycle. You can get Apple CarPlay, you can get heated grips, heated seats. It's got a power windshield. You can get it with a 7-speed automatic dual clutch transmission. You can get so many features on this bike. It is the ultimate lap of luxury. And what we're going to do is talk about how we got to today's Goldwing on the podcast. There have been more than 500,000 of these machines sold over the years. It's been 6 generations. It's been 50 years. And we figured it was worth a look back at the Goldwing and how it got to where it is today.
So one of the things we wanted to throw out for you, and we had this written down, and I think producer Chase deleted it when we were reworking our doc here, but we had asked you, the Highside, Lowside listening audience, what bikes should we do, or what bikes should we do?
That's right. We did.
In season 10 as an icon. And we got a lot of great suggestions. I think there was over 20 or 23 odd suggestions. The Goldwing was the only motorcycle that our audience, that more than one person was like, you should do a Goldwing. It is the 50th anniversary of this bike, entering into production. So we felt that while there are other great iconic bikes that we're going to hit on in the future, that this is definitely one that we should hit on while it's topical.
So Spurgeon, now that we've had our fun little classified showdown and we've talked about and we've explained what a Goldwing is today, let's go back in time to the debut, to the 1970s when the Goldwing came out, and we agreed that it's a good idea to talk about what the motorcycling landscape looked like when the Goldwing came out.
I love these icon episodes because it allows us to do a little bit of historical research, and I think you and I are
history
both enjoy
teacher that you love it. Yeah.
But I got lost in the weeds a little bit here, and it was fun to go back and see, keeping in mind that aside from Harley Davidson, there were no big touring options. And I think, even from a fairing standpoint, we'll get into this in a minute here, but like you could buy aftermarket fairings and add them to a motorcycle, but there wasn't this idea of large wind protected motorcycles the way that we have today. It was much more bare.
Right. And that brings us to the first interesting fact about the Goldwing was that it was not introduced as a touring motorcycle. It wasn't really supposed to be that. It was supposed to be, quote, the ultimate motorcycle or the ultimate motorcycling experience or something like that. Honda wanted to build an even like sort of bigger, more majestic, more powerful, more impressive, CB750, for example, which had come out and sort of shocked the world in the late 60s. It was just a big naked motorcycle. It was supposed to be a standard bike that was impressive for a whole host of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was also the first bike that went into production after Mr. Honda stepped down from like actually running the company.
And that's a good factoid.
One of the things that Lance talked about in his recent 50th anniversary article was that the Goldwing was the first vehicle produced under Honda's lineup that was that introduced a large product leader kind of design where like there was one person, Hisao Nizui. I totally butchered that, I'm sure, but was the first person to lead a project where this individual is in charge of the entire project from start to finish and brought everything together. And it was so every vehicle that's been produced by Honda ever since has followed this large project leader model that was introduced with the Goldwing.
Right. That is interesting. Yeah. And every time you hear about a new Honda coming out, like as we go to press launches and stuff for new bikes, you always hear about the large project leader who's the person in charge of the whole thing. So that's kind of cool. Actually, what Honda came out with in 1975 was a 999cc flat 4-cylinder engine. So those horizontally opposed 4-cylinder engine. Sort of picture two BMW engines, one on top of the other, or a Volkswagen Beetle engine, if you like. And yeah, so it was 1,000cc flat 4, and it had
999cc.
Sorry. Excuse me. 999 cc's. And it had shaft drive. And it was a big motorcycle. It was a big, heavy, as we said, sort of like naked or standard motorcycle. It was not as big as the prototype, which I learned in all this research. I learned that there was a prototype that
The
they
M1.
built. Right. The M1 prototype, or what was it called? Project 372 or something, also had another nickname. But anyway, the M1 prototype, which was in the early 70s, like years before the actual Goldwing came out, was actually a 1,470 cc flat six. And it was, as prototypes often are, it was made to be this really impressive kind of like proof of concept. And I think it's interesting that they came out with that prototype, or they had that prototype in the early 70s. And then when it came to actual production of the bike, they just went with a flat four, probably because they thought it was more reasonable.
Yeah, and the Goldwing doesn't get bumped to a flat 6 1500 until like 80 late 80s. So and we'll get into that in a minute. But so just taking a look at, so Goldwing is introduced in 1975. The only real competitor that I could find here in 1975 was a Harley Davidson FLH 1200 Electra Glide. And so to give you some side-by-side comparisons here, and this is all, claimed data. We didn't go out and find these bikes and weigh these bikes or measure these bikes on dynos, but a 1975 FLH 1200 was a 1207 cc V-twin from Harley Davidson, produced roughly 60 claimed horsepower, 70 foot-pounds of torque, weighed at 717 pounds with a 4.2 gallon tank, had a 4-speed transmission, saddlebags and windshield were included.
Right.
Now, the Goldwing, as Zach said, 999 cc's, flat 4, 78 horsepower, so almost 20 horsepower more than the Harley, 61 foot-pounds of torque, 602 pounds, and I believe both of this is dry weight, so neither one, so 717, so it's about 100 pounds lighter.
Yep.
Held 5 gallons of gas with a 5-speed transmission. Saddlebags were not included in the original Goldwing.
So interesting comparison, and also fair to point out that, as we said before, the Goldwing was not a touring bike when it came out. So the sort of other machines in the motorcycling world then were sort of like your airhead BMWs, right? Your sort of BMW R75, like 750 cc air-cooled flat twins. You had, British bikes still lingering in the market, right? Your Norton Commandos, your Triumph Bonnevilles, stuff like that, Moto Guzzi's maybe. And other Japanese manufacturers were starting to play around with large engines as well, but it was a weird time. It was a weird motorcycle to come out at that time, because it seems like, and from what I've heard anecdotally and what I read about the history of the bike, it didn't really fit in to a specific category at the time, right? Yeah. It's kind of a strange thing. They produced this motorcycle and they were like, look at what we can do. And I think it's fair to move on in our little timeline here, Spurge, to say that almost immediately, it seems like they started being used for touring, right? People just sort of adopted them as touring bikes, which is, one of the reasons it's easy to compare them to touring bikes way back when.
Can I ask a question for you? So I know that you obviously have the family history of BMW, and I kind of gravitated towards Harley Davidson is like the premier touring bike here in America. But if you're looking at like a BMW, like a 75 BMW R90/6, did they were very similar in the fact that like you had to add like a fairing and bags to them, right? Did they come? Do you know if they came standard with that kind of stuff?
I don't have to look up when the first RT was, but not that early, I don't think. Gosh, I wonder if my dad is disowning me secretly listening to this podcast right now. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of that kind of, rhetoric or style going around. In fact, I remember, speaking of my dad, I remember him telling me a story about a friend who had an airhead BMW in the 70s and was like, doing burnouts on it and like shifting without the clutch and that kind of thing. And my dad said, yeah, my buddies and I were like, you can't do that to that thing, man. It's like, it's like got a tractor transmission. You got to take it easy on that thing. You can't do that. And then the next time they saw that acquaintance or friend or whatever, he had a Goldwing, and he was like, yeah, I got a Honda. Like, I didn't want to deal with the BMW transmissions and BMW this and BMW that. Like, so the point is, if you had a bike like that, a Goldwing was sort of in they were cross shopping, people were interested in that kind of bike. Whereas now, if you have a BMW Boxer Twin with no fairing on it, there's no chance you'd be cross shopping a Goldwing.
Looks like 1977 R100 RT.
That was the first RT.
Yeah, about 70 horsepower, about 56 foot-pounds of torque.
Right,
out of a 980 cc flat twin.
Right. So that's and you have to think that had something to do with either culturally motorcycling moving that way or straight up Goldwing influence. Like this big kind of smooth 4-cylinder engine comes out, and people immediately start putting, or soon after, start putting big Windjammer fairings on them, big like large fairings to cut through the wind, and created this bike that was really good at touring. And it not that surprising that soon after BMW was like, hey, we're going to put a big fairing on our bike.
Can we just pause? I want to pause for a second to just, for those of you listening that might not know this, it wasn't until 1956 that in America we had the National Interstate Highway Act, right? So like big cross-country highways, the way that we have them today, it wasn't even established as something that was possible until the mid-50s. So these highways weren't really built and developed until we got into the 60s and the 70s. And by the 70s, you now had these linking highways across the United States. I'm sorry, I'm getting all flustered here, but like but prior to this, it was just little 2-lane roads, and a lot of the roads were still dirt and unpaved. So we don't get into the idea of like, let's hop on a freeway and just blast across the country until we're looking at, the mid 50s in America, so that right. It took some time for this to develop. And you mentioned, the fairings, like, the Goldwing is really interesting too, because up until like the early 70s, there was an individual named Craig Vetter who introduces the Windjammer fairing. I remember this from my growing up because my dad had a Windjammer fairing on his late 70s Yamaha for touring down the highway. Yeah. And so like in 74, Honda goes to Craig Vetter, who's selling these aftermarket fairings, and says, hey, we want you to introduce a fairing for our Goldwing. So Honda didn't come out and introduce and say, hey, we're going to give you an option and we're going to give you a Honda accessory you can choose from. They went to Mr. Vetter and they said, hey, you're building these things. We want you to have one for our bike. And so in 1974, they started working together, and there was a Vetter fairing or a Windjammer fairing from Craig Vetter was like the fairing for a Goldwing until I believe 1980.
Right.
It's just, think about that today in modern standpoint, right? Like you don't go out and buy an aftermarket fairing for your motorcycle. Presumably you get the one that it comes on from the manufacturer. It's
right,
just,
or a replica of that or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting for sure. And I think it speaks a lot to the impact that the Goldwing had out of the gate. It wasn't long. We have in our notes here that it wasn't long before the Goldwing Riders Association was established, before the Goldwing Rally was established, before all these like groups of owners started like building rides and groups and meetings and congealing. And that's, I think that's a sign of a product that has really made a big impact. And the fact that the people started using them as touring bikes was, as we said, had an impact on the rest of motorcycling culture, but also on Honda's development of the bike. Because to move along, Spurge, if you don't mind, the second generation of the Goldwing came out in 79 or 80, I believe, with a slightly larger engine, and some updates. And in that second generation was the first iteration, I believe, of the Aspencade model, which was a full-on touring bike.
I think the Aspencade came a little bit later. I think the Interstate was the first one. I think 1980 was the GL 1100 Interstate.
Okay.
And I think the Aspencade was like another like version of that, but the Interstate was the one that I remember, where it had the factory fairings, the windshield, the saddlebag, the top box, all as like a standard kind of feature set, and then it got bumped in displacement to, I think, 1,085 cc's was where the displacement bump came into.
Right. Well, apologies if my terminology was incorrect. But point being, the second generation of the Goldwing was when they really took a clear step toward being this touring motorcycle. Agreed?
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of interesting. And the bike continued to grow also. I mean, you pointed out what was the weight of I think it was 600 and something pounds.
610 pounds roughly for the first gen.
And second gen touring bikes were like up over 700 pounds. They were getting to be big and kind of like opulent. And it's pretty interesting. Have you ever ridden a first or second gen bike?
I rode a first gen.
Okay.
Like
so a non-faired one, like a naked one?
An original GL 1000. It was in rough shape, but at the dealership that I was working at down in Tennessee, there was one in for service, and I got to sit and talk with the mechanic who was bitching about how hard the carburetors were to work on. He didn't like working on them, and he was the only person there that knew how to work on them, because this would have been in like 2012 or something like that. So well after it was already 40, 30, 35 years old. But I do think, whether you're looking at the first generation or the later generations, I think really when we're talking about this era of like the mid to late 70s touring motorcycles, I think the thing that Honda really changed here was the reliability, right? And the idea that you could go out and you could tour on a motorcycle, you go across the country and back, and it's gonna stick with you. It's not going to leave you stranded on the side of the road. And I remember when we had Peter Egan onto the podcast, we talked about one of his anecdotes, and I believe it was actually the first story that he published for Cycle World magazine. He was planning a trip with his wife on a Norton Commando, and he went into his local shop and he said, what do I do to get this tour ready? And mechanic looks at it, he goes, well, just put a new chain and sprocket on, change the spark plugs, and then trade it in on a Goldwing. And that was kind of like the joke at the time where, right. I could go get a Goldwing, but then there's no challenge left to it because the Goldwing is going to be reliable and it's going to, cruise down the highway and it's going to get me there and it's going to get me back. And that was really, I think one of the biggest things that Honda started changing the image of for motorcycling in the 70s, especially with something like the Goldwing, was you could go somewhere and you could come back, and it wasn't going to necessarily give you any unwanted adventure, if you will.
It wasn't right. It wasn't this Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance thing where you are constantly fiddling and your road trip's an adventure because you're not sure what's going to happen kind of thing. It was like, it was a more stable thing to do culturally. That's Absolutely. An interesting point. Yeah. Yeah.
But to your point, by the time we get to the 1980 GL 1100, the Goldwing's changing. So it's changing fast. And I think it speaks to, again, the evolution of motorcycling in the 70s and into the early 80s. Everything was just every 2 or 3 years, models were changing and updating and taking these big leaps and bounds. And the other note that was a big shift for the 80 GL 1100 was production had moved to Maryville, Ohio. So now all of a sudden Honda is producing the Goldwings in America. And that was the other big shift within a 5-year span of the Goldwing being introduced to the Goldwing getting its first iteration change. Production had shifted to Ohio.
Yeah. And that certainly speaks to the sort of like market interest and what the bikes were doing and how they were being used, Another anecdote that I remember my dad telling me was when they used to call them lead wings because they were so big and heavy. Anyone who had a bike that was like, it's a little bit smaller and a little bit more agile, because they had started in that category of sort of like naked regular motorcycles. They called them lead wings. Which is fair because they're big and heavy.
Did your dad ever I know that like they were probably a little bit before my dad's time. Like my dad started, I think, in like 74, 75 with like smaller displacement bikes. Did your dad ever consider a Goldwing? Was that ever one of the bikes that was
consider? I couldn't say if he ever considered. Maybe, but he was always kind of like I don't know. He was always into European stuff,
Yeah.
And
if he called it a lead wing, he presumably wasn't saying that as a.
Yeah, I don't know if it was him. If he was perpetrating that, I think it was more like he noticed that that's what they were called. Maybe he did throw that term around. But what I think is interesting about it, the reason I bring it up is that even though there were certainly as the following and owners group and whatever for Goldwings grew, so did, people putting them down, right? People saying like, no, I don't want that. But really the strength in the bike was greater than its weaknesses, and it built this culture around it, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, moving to the Marysville plant, probably, I mean, I wouldn't know. I'm sure some of our listeners were around when that happened and maybe that was a big deal. It seems like a big deal.
I think what's interesting too, and I don't want to get too far off topic here, but by 1980, the Goldwing has presumably grown to being something big and heavy, referred to as a lead wing. And then in 1981, Honda introduces a GL 500 silver wing, as kind of like a smaller version. So like they're now saying, hey, we realize that maybe this is too big for some people within 5 years of it. So now we're going to introduce a little, more of like an opposed V twin, same kind of touring accoutrements, but in something that, weighs, 200 pounds less, so it's like they're already right. Acknowledging how big it has gotten. And now we're going to introduce something a little bit smaller. Which
is actually something we should remember next. Like anytime you're riding a Goldwing, or if you do ride a Goldwing, or your grandfather rides a Goldwing, your uncle or your aunt or whoever, and they're like, that bike's too big, you should get something smaller. Then feel free to fire back with, yeah, you should get a 1980 silver wing. They already thought of that, actually. They knew it was too heavy a few years after it came out, and they already did that. So no need to make a comment. Well, I'd like to move on to the third gen, which in my mind, I don't know, do you have any notes on third gen? It grew to the GL 1200 and the engine went up to 1,182 cc's, still a flat four. The only thing little factoid about this gen that I thought was interesting, but
what's your factoid?
I learned that the naked version of the GL 1200 was discontinued.
Yes.
So this is arguably when the Goldwing leaned in to touring. Yeah. It's a touring bike. It's not that thing that we came out with
within 10 years
ago.
So exactly. I don't think, for those of you out there shopping around, there's nothing that's going to really be notable about a GL 1200 over a GL 1100 in my opinion, except for from 1975. By 1985,
right.
Goldwing naked version is gone. It is now only a large touring machine.
Right.
And then by 1988, this is where we usher in the GL 1500. And Zach, what's the biggest, most notable change of the GL 1500?
Well, we mentioned it once before. This has got to be the flat six, right? So this is when it goes from a flat four to a flat six, or as I like to call it, a Volkswagen Beetle engine to a Porsche 911 engine. And you got to say, that's a pretty big upgrade. I think we can agree, right?
Well, I think it's interesting in the fact that this is now
sorry, just to be clear, when I say that, a Volkswagen Beetle has a flat four and a Porsche 911 has a flat six. Those are the only similarities. I'm just talking about like engine design. Just a joke. It doesn't actually have a Porsche engine in it.
No. But it's funny. And I think the other thing to note here too is like now it's back to what the original prototype, kind of was. I mean, the pictures of the original prototype almost look like a naked sport bike with some hard luggage on it. Whereas like now this is definitely a big touring motorcycle. I don't recall ever riding a GL 1100 or GL 1200. I do remember riding a GL 1500 and I don't remember liking it.
Oh, really? What did you dislike about it?
It was, I don't know where to start. Yeah, it was big. It was heavy. It was just so wallowy. And again, maybe I was riding it, 20 years after its prime at that point in time. So I'm sure that it could have used a little service upgrade, but we would get, we would get so many, GL 1500s traded in on like new gen, future gen Goldwings. So like, it was just one that there was always somebody trading in, a GL 1500 on something.
Well, a couple of things that I found about this bike that are like anecdotes that I found from the time. One that I really liked, two that are sort of at odds with each other. On the one hand, it got to be bigger and more luxurious. It got 1500 cc flat six. It got a bigger fuel tank. It had hydraulic a valve actuation, I believe, which means you didn't have to maintain it. There are only 2 carburetors. There's one for each bank of cylinders. And one anecdote I saw was sort of like fairly easy to work on. It's like relatively low maintenance for a big bike like that, which is good because it was supposed to log a lot of miles and it was also heavy and big and complicated. On the topic of it being big and complicated, another anecdote I found was a quote from a mechanic who said, we used to charge 2 hours of labor to change a rear tire on a Goldwing, on a GL 1500. And that just shows you like that rear tire is buried under like the rear wheel. You don't even see it. If you like think about looking at a Goldwing, a GL 1500, like the one that I found in my little classified Showdown, like you can barely see the rear wheel, which means if you need to work on something back there, you're going to have a lot of work to do to get to it.
Hey, so I mean, I know that this was the one that Ari obviously built his bike off of, but wasn't, and I'm trying to remember, didn't the Winnebago have a fuel pump issue in the Walmart parking lot that you had to figure out how to solve for?
It did, yeah. The sort of like automatic petcock, the sort of like the sort of auto valve diaphragm thing malfunctioned. Yeah. I don't even know if we ever found out why.
But my point in bringing that up is we're now getting, I know that you're saying that this is easier to work on, but you're also starting to incorporate technology in a way that is, again, moving the Goldwing forward.
Yes.
It is becoming more complex in ways in the fact that, like we were joking earlier, but it's got a tape deck. It's got a built-in stereo. It's got, you got all of the things that start to really kind of creep up from a technology standpoint. If you go back and watch that episode, Ari is rebuilding an electronic petcock or bypassing an electronic petcock.
Bypassing it, yeah.
And how much crap did you have to take off to like reach in and get it and find it? And like, cause these bikes are covered now, they're not, it's not a naked bike the way it used to be.
But it is a facade. As anyone who's ever taken a fairing off a motorcycle or a piece of plastic knows, when you pull that off, it's like, whoa, there's it can be kind of a hornet's nest under there. I think at this time, it is a particularly intimidating era of motorcycle, because now there are a lot of things that sort of smooth things over and like kind of gloss over maintenance. Like fuel injection is widely agreed to be good and better, and you just like don't have to worry about it.
Right.
People who say, "Oh, carburetors are so much easier to work on." Well, what you're talking about a 1970 something Honda or BMW where the carb is just accessible. It's easy. You pop it off. You take a look at it. What you're not talking about is 2 carburetors that are buried under loads of purple bodywork, that each carb serves a bank of 3 cylinders, which has an automatic diaphragm petcock system. Like it's sort of between the simplicity of carburation and internal combustion technology that we like to, romanticize in our mind, and the modern era of technology, which you feel like we quote unquote don't have to worry about. And it's in this era when things were modern enough that they were getting sophisticated, but still old enough that they were complex. And you had to deal with it, which is
put a picture up right now. So if we have our lovely editor Matt, if you put a picture up of a 1988 Honda Goldwing GL 1500, and I want the audience, if you're driving, play along later at home when it's safe. But like I want you to try to picture what Zach was talking about earlier. So you have to replace your rear tire. Like the plastic that has to come off before you can get your exhaust off to reach the lug nuts for the rear wheel. Like the body work on this is all encompassing. Think about if you had to find the carburetor and what pieces of plastic you would have to take off to just reach the carburetor on this.
I mean, while we're looking at this picture of a 1988 or 89, whatever, Goldwing, where's the brake caliper, the front brake caliper? You can't even see that.
It's got a
cover on it.
It's got a cover on it.
It's got an Art Deco chrome cover, plastic chrome. Everything was just like draped with this. It was just more was more.
More was more, and
you got more.
What I remember about riding this was that like once you got it moving and you were out in the highway, it was fine. It was kind of like I used to have a 1985 Oldsmobile, a big Delta 88 honking car, and I took my grandmother for a ride the one time. She goes, "Oh, this is great. It reminds me of an old Cadillac." And I was like, it's big and it's soft and it's wallowy. It wasn't something that you wanted to like wing through a corner, but it was like a big comfortable thing. And like when you're looking at this bike, you're like, yeah, this is big and comfortable, but it was not the epitome of handling. And I think the other thing that you start to see with this era of motorcycles in general, the Goldwing wasn't the only bike guilty of it, but technology starts to get introduced here, which isn't around anymore, right? Like, so whether we're talking about tape decks or we're talking about like some of the more popular styling cues of the 80s, a lot of this stuff doesn't carry through to later models. You know,
you don't have CB radio in your Toyota Tacoma?
I don't.
Wow.
I still have a CD player, but I don't have a tape deck.
There you go. Nice. Yeah. I guess if you don't mind, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
If you don't mind, on the topic of big and soft, I think it'd be good to move on to the 5th gen of the Honda Goldwing. But before we do, I do have one more little factoid that I thought was interesting that I tripped over in my research, which is that in, when was it? 1990 something. Sometime during the run of the GL 1500, which I think was 1987 or 88 to 2000, the large project leader, the LPL, as we talked about earlier, Aoki-san, moved to the United States for 3 years. So what I read was to learn English and to study the Goldwing world in the United States as a task, as the first task in developing the 5th generation Goldwing. So a Japanese engineer moved here to learn the language, learn the culture of motorcycling, learn what a Goldwing meant, in preparation for the 2001 Goldwing to come out. And you mentioned this earlier, Spurge, this was sort of the beginning of the modern era, if you will, I think, of Goldwing.
It makes you wonder, and I know that we didn't, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that I really like these icon episodes because it allows us to kind of dive into some of the research and the history, and that's fun for me especially. But one of the things that I didn't find was I would be interested to know how many of the 600 and odd thousand Goldwings that were ever produced, how many were sold in the United States versus how many were sold elsewhere. Because like this has to be a United States of America model, right? Like, right. I mean, from a sales standpoint.
Yeah. And you talked about that plant moving to Ohio, to build Goldwings. And it reminds me of an anecdote from years ago reading car magazines, where they did like an American Iron pickup truck challenge or something like that. It was a big test of pickup trucks. It was Ford F-150 versus Chevy Silverado 1500 versus whatever. And they called it American trucks or American Iron or whatever. It was Road and Tracker, Car and Driver, something like that. And in this test, they had a Toyota Tundra, I think. And someone wrote in and said, you can't have an American Iron pickup truck showdown with a Toyota in it. Like, you guys are nuts. And the response that the editor published was, it's a pickup truck and it is made in Indiana.
Yeah.
And that truly, like, if you think about it, it's a Toyota, and was it designed in Japan and does it have Japanese influence? Undoubtedly. But like, come on, like a Toyota Tundra is just about as American a pickup truck as any of them, Yeah. Or it was at the time this was published. And so it does, Honda is obviously very much a Japanese company and has, I don't mean to suggest that the Goldwing is an American product, but it's a product for America. And I don't know the answer to your question of how many were sold in the United States, but it's got to be almost all of them, right?
I would imagine the majority of Goldwings have
good
landed.
Bike for getting across Australia, I reckon. You want to go Sydney to Perth and you want to be comfortable, you might as well get on it. Okay, so
the GL 1800.
The GL 1800.
This was the first Goldwing that I ever rode. Was a GL 1800.
Same, I think. Same.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, speaks to our generation, because this was produced from 2001 to 2017.
Yeah. I mean, a 16-year run, it was just, no, there was 1 year where it wasn't. So it was a 15-year run, because I think there was 1 year where they were moving production back to Japan. We'll get to that in a minute. They didn't produce it. But yeah, so this is ABS becomes optional. It's now fuel injected. There's an aluminum frame.
Correct.
It really just takes a step forward. It feels more nimble. I think one of the things that I remember, because I rode a GL 1800 around the Tennessee area, and I used to take weekend trips over to Deal's Gap, which was the tail of the dragon, most famously known for its 300 odd curves and short amount of miles. I should know this, and I have the sticker on my
saddlebag
on my toolbox. I think it's 316 curves and 11 miles, but I'm going to get that wrong, and somebody is gonna correct me in the comments. But for the longest time, the record holder for who made it through the tail of the dragon 11 miles the fastest was not an R6 or a little RD 350 or any of that. It was a Goldwing. So there was some.
Was it a GL 1800?
I believe it was a GL 1800. There was some individual down in the border of Tennessee and North Carolina ripping a GL 1800. I think it was a yellow one. Back and forth.
Oh yeah,
back and forth.
I bet it had a little plushie of a yellow M&M character.
Can you imagine though showing up on like an R1, or a 636 being like, I'm gonna go down and break the record for who can go through the tail of the dragon the fastest, and then somebody smokes you on a Goldwing. It speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to how the Goldwing shifted its direction a little bit with the GL 1800 based on the GL 1500.
It did not, I will say, become smaller, because I transitioned into this a few minutes ago by saying, speaking of large and soft, and as the Goldwing's trajectory has up to 50 years, the GL 1800 is peak big for the Goldwing. We'll talk about the latest gen later, but this is like, it has the most storage. It has the widest, plushest seats. That's unofficial. I don't know if that's a fact or not, but it's a big motorcycle. It's an 1832 cc flat six. In my research, I found an owner quote who was talking about the size of the bike and weighed it with him on it. He looked in the picture, he looked like a fairly normal sized fella, corn-fed American, but not ridiculous. And he said, with me on the bike, it weighed 1,150 pounds. So almost 1,200 pounds with him on the bike. That's a lot of, like, more than half a ton rolling down the road. This, I think, like I said, this is Goldwing's peak big.
It's interesting because now, as the years go by with the GL 1800, so introduced in 2001, as you get into like the mid 2000s to the late 2000s, like 2005 through 2010, it starts to focus on, first Goldwing, first motorcycle to introduce an airbag. Right. And I don't think that stuck around forever.
I wanted to talk about that because I think it might be the last motorcycle to ever introduce an airbag. Right? Are there any others? Has anyone ever bothered?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe. I remember the promotional photos from Honda at the time were like, it was like a ride test dummy holding on to the handlebars and just this giant bag exploding in their face. So I don't think the motorcycle airbag ever came on, but the Goldwing was the first to introduce it.
It was. Yes.
It started incorporating like in-dash GPS, and it started incorporating satellite radio and 6-speed CD changers and all this technology. And again, technology where, if we're talking about the 80s, tape decks didn't carry through. You no longer have, we're no longer getting CD players in Goldwings. And we'll talk about some of the innovation where like Goldwing ushered in, top of the line technology and innovation. And as that technology became outdated, it's kind of little marks in time on the tree bark, if you will, or the rings of a tree as it wasn't valid any longer.
Right. Well, so you said this was the first Goldwing you ever rode, you thought was this 5th gen one. I
don't remember the year, but the GL 1800 was the first Goldwing that I ever rode.
And what was that like, Spurge? I assume you went.
I think this was the one where this was kind of like what I measured. And to be fair,
you borrowed it from the dealership to go on a date. How'd the date go? Just tell us.
It did not go well. it went too well. They were like, they wanted to commit after you bring a GL 1800 home. They want to commit, and it's you do not put a significant other on a Goldwing unless you're ready to make a true and honest person out of them. No, I think it was incredibly smooth, fast, comfortable. I remember being impressed by the handling, especially later after comparing it to like a GL 1500, thinking like these bikes are only one generation apart, and they felt worlds apart. Because the GL 1800 was just that much better, you know?
Well, my quick anecdote is that I did a project years ago with my buddy Ari, whereby we decided to tow dirt bikes behind touring bikes and go on a motorcycle adventure. And it
was a video, right? It was a video for this one?
It was a video, yeah that's right. Yeah. On Two Wheels episode way back when. I had a Goldwing, and we hooked up a trailer to it, like $150 Harbor Freight trailer. And I put a Honda, I was going to say CRF 250X on the back of the trailer. And I towed that sucker out across the Southwest, and we went on a dirt bike ride and then towed the bikes home. My Goldwing anecdote here is, at one point I felt comfortable enough while towing a trailer down the highway to set the cruise control and sit in the passenger seat of the Goldwing and just let it cruise along. Now, professional rider closed course, do not attempt.
Kids, if you're at home listening to this, do not do as we say.
Correct.
Or as we do.
If you want stability in a cruising, in a touring bike, the Goldwing GL 1800 was phenomenal. I mean, like, it would practically ride down the road by itself. And I mean, I honestly barely noticed the trailer. Like, we rode along 2-lane roads. We rode down the freeway. The only time I would notice the trailer is if I pulled into like a gas station and there was a big bump, and you'd go like through the little divot, you know, the sort of like drainage divot, but where a parking lot meets the road. And the trailer would go through, and it would sort of like tug on the bike a little bit, and you could feel the trailer's load. But in large part, didn't even notice I was towing another motorcycle in my gear bag. Phenomenal, just amount of torque and power and, weight to throw around.
I think another thing, and I'm sure that this happened earlier, but like, I remember in this era too, like, this is where, and I'm sure that there's going to be something that's going to correct me, but like, this is where I remember like people converting the Goldwings over to trikes too. Was like, you could get like the big GL 1800 trikes, and there was like special kits where you could have all the color matched body work, and we'd have people come in and special order them. And, so that was a big trend. You had mentioned trailers. So, Zach talked about how the GL 1800 is really like the epitome of size. Like, I don't think, cause we'll talk about the next generation in a minute here where it starts to get smaller, but like, the most trunk capacity, the most saddlebag capacity, and if it wasn't enough, you could get the trike and you could get the trailer behind it. And you could, you could add
color matched. Exactly. I mean, this is another moment, and hopefully I'm not interrupting you, Spurge, but this is another moment in the Goldwing's history, I think, where there were so many jokes. I don't even know how many jokes were thrown around about how big a GL 1800 was, about how fat it was at the back, how like the airbag resembled whatever. It doesn't matter. There were so many jokes, and yet the legend grew, right? They still sold, and people still rode them, and they loved them. In the commentary articles, the many commentary articles we've posted about the Goldwing, every time someone comments with a picture of themselves and their Goldwing and said like, I had one, I loved it, it was such a great bike, or whatever. And I just think it's great. I love that dichotomy that maybe no motorcycle has received as much hate over the years as a Goldwing, like no single model, and yet no model is arguably more legendary. Like, it's such a popular bike because every time someone rides one, they like it. Or not every time, but not often, more often than not, So one of the things that we failed to mention, and I think it bears kind of a pause for, is as we look at like the GL 1500, one of the things that happened with the GL 1500 was
the other bikes started popping off of Goldwing platforms. So we talked about the naked Goldwing going away with the GL 1500.
They sort of brought it back.
They brought the Valkyrie out, right? So the Valkyrie was like a big cruiser with the Goldwing platform. And then when you get into the GL 1800, we've talked about it in our, when did we talk for the Valkyrie Rune? It was,
was that with Alonzo Bowden? Didn't he have one?
No. It was the episode we did where we called them, oh, this is going to drive me insane. What
blunders?
Was it blunders or was it like, it might have been blunders or it was.
This happens when you do 100 and something episodes, everybody. You're sort of like, when did we talk about the
producer Chase? I know that I can see producer Chase typing right now. It was the,
I literally don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, we did an episode where it was
ugliest bikes ever or something. What?
No, it was Suzuki B King. They were underappreciated in their time, and then they become you go back and you like them later. What's the word? Like your
cult motorcycles?
Yes, we did the cult classics episode.
You got it, everybody. Okay.
Oh, no, you got it. I just jumped off of the cult classics episode. Anyway, so it's with the GL 1800 that the Valkyrie came out or the Valkyrie Rune came out and didn't really catch on. But then in 2013, and I remember this was one where I was still at the dealership when the first one showed up, and Goldwing people either loved or hated it, but they introduced the F6B. And the F6B is important because that will speak to the evolution of what we see happen with the 6th gen and the most recent gen. But the F6B comes out, and it's kind of their version of a bagger, but all it really was a Goldwing without the top box.
And a stubbier windscreen.
Right?
Yeah. It's a cool idea.
And so this is going to inform eventually what happens for the next gen. But one of the things to note is that production goes back to Japan. So in 2011, Goldwing's not produced in 2011. I wonder if that makes the 50th anniversary, not the 50th anniversary, if there was none produced in 2011.
Ooh, Spurge Dunbar with the gotcha moment on Highside, Lowside. We see you on the 49 years of Goldwing. Man. Unbelievable.
I can't believe I didn't even notice that. But yeah, so that was kind of the synopsis of the GL 1800.
Yes. Last thing I'll say, you did the right thing bringing up the Valkyrie. You should have talked about that with the GL 1500. And I do have a Valkyrie story. Well, whatever.
No, back up. Tell us the Valkyrie story. What do you got?
No.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it. We can
show the clip of young Zack riding a Valkyrie and having a good time right now, if we like. But the interesting thing about the Valkyrie, I rode a Valkyrie in the 5th gen, in the GL 1800, Valkyrie 1800 generation. So not the first gen of Valkyrie, but maybe actually the last generation of Valkyrie, because I don't think there's a new one, come to think of it. Really fun bike, because what I personally find with motorcycles is oftentimes the most engaging and interesting version of a motorcycle is whatever the one is that is the smallest and gives you the most distilled and raw experience with the engine. So think, KTM has a 1390 Super Adventure, this and that. But for me, when I ride a 1390 Super Duke is when I'm sort of like, this is it. Same thing, you ride a Yamaha Tracer 9, cool. The touring bike, 3-cylinder engine, lovely. It works well, all's well and good. Then you ride an MT-09 and you're like, this is like the raw distillation of the engine. So that's what the Valkyrie is to the Goldwing in my mind. It's still huge, mind you, but it is it's a distillation of that flat 6 engine, and it's a riot because it has like 100 and something foot-pounds of torque, like just above idle. It would just like smoke the tire for no reason. It was hilarious, awesome motorcycle. That's all I'd like to say about the Valkyrie.
I think it's a great point. And I think, we talked about like original horsepower and torque claims with the first generation Goldwing. And I don't think we've gotten into, the horsepower and torque claims, but it's like just a tractor amount of torque. Like the flat 6 is just an incredible engine.
It is. And yeah, we can touch on that more coming up here, but I do think one of the reasons that we have not talked more about horsepower and torque numbers as we've moved through the generations is that it became less a thing for the Goldwing, right? Like, just as touring bikes are, It doesn't matter really. Does it have enough power to go down the highway and be like, that's what you need to know. Like, that's why there's just sort of less talk about performance figures with touring bikes, because they're not classic performance bikes. And I think that sort of speaks to the sort of style of riding. Okay, Spurge, should we, we've got one more generation to talk about, but
yes,
first,
let's get a word in from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back and jump into the 6th generation of Goldwing, and then get into some modern day comparisons. Okay, so we are back, and we want to wrap up the look at Goldwings throughout the years and the different milestones with a look at the 6th generation Goldwing, introduced in 2018.
Indeed.
And Zach, what were like, when we're talking about like the 6th generation Goldwing, why was this such a significant change for the Goldwing lineup? Like, what were some of the things we saw introduced here?
Right. Lots.
Buckle up, audience, because this was a departure. Yeah.
Buckle up. This was a total overhaul of the Goldwing. Spurge mentioned that it got smaller, and it did. The fairings got smaller, narrower. The saddlebags got smaller in both in capacity and in width. It's just sort of more svelte. It's sleeker. The engine was completely redesigned, different bore, different stroke, almost exactly the same displacement, 1833 cc's, but it got a smaller bore and a longer stroke, which, don't worry about it if you don't know what that means. Basically, they were able to make the engine shorter front to back, to make it more compact. It was offered with a dual clutch transmission, or DCT, meaning it had that 7-speed automatic that we referenced earlier in the episode. It had ride modes. It had perhaps one of my favorite features is the whole front end was redesigned. It has a Hossack style double wishbone wacky front end, which we'll show a diagram of on screen if you're watching, but it looks nothing like a classic telescopic fork. It got a whole bunch of electronic upgrades. It really was a complete overhaul of the Goldwing platform, and Honda obviously did its best to maintain the bike's aura and charisma and legend while trying to improve it for the 21st century, I suppose. What did I miss?
So we talked about, just some fun facts here. We talked about like tape decks and GL 1500s. One of the fun facts that I noted in our first look article when I went to the launch of not the ride, but the actual like unveiling of the 6th gen. In 2001, when the GL 1800 was introduced, 2001 was also the first year that the iPod was introduced by Apple, which changed the way that the world listened to music. And then in 2018, when the 6th generation Goldwing was introduced, it was introduced with Apple CarPlay. And we now could just have your phone pair right to your Goldwing, and it would play the music for you. So that was interesting. I think to kind of jump into a couple other maybe details here, it was the first Goldwing to get a 6-speed transmission. So up until 2018,
is that true? The GL 1800 before that did not have a 6-speed.
It had a 5-speed.
Wow.
A 5-speed transmission.
I did not realize that.
So the 6-speed transmission was introduced for the first time in 2018 for Goldwing. Now the outgoing 5-speed, the 5th gear was an overdrive gear, and some people said you didn't need it. Some people said you did need it. But first time to get a 6-speed transmission was in 2018. The other thing to note,
and a 7-speed automatic.
And you could choose between
at the same time.
7-speed. Yep. The other thing we noted too was back in 2013, we had mentioned before we went on break the F6B and really what that would foreshadow. So now, as we look at the 6th generation Goldwing, you could get a standard, which was no trunk, which kind of looked like what an F6B was, or you could get the Tour model, which is what you think of when you think of a Goldwing. It has the big backrest and the trunk and all that jazz. So those were some different ways of thinking about that. And my final note here from a fun fact standpoint is we would get a lot of service calls on the GL 1800s because they would the steering head bearings would get loose, and the front end had like if you took in a Goldwing on trade.
This is 5th gen GL 1800 2001 to 2017 era copy. And when you worked at the dealership, you'd get service calls for that. Okay.
Yeah. One of the main issues was if the steering head bearings would just get loose or they'd get worn out. The front end was it was such a big heavy bike that it would just destroy
under a lot of
steering
pressure.
head bearings. Yeah. So to address that, Zach was talking about the double wishbone front end suspension. And I think that was a notable change because it was a completely different front end to this. The wheel went up and down. It didn't compress at a telescopic fork anymore. And it solved those issues of loose steering head bearings.
And while that's a good call out, it's, it strengthens it strengthens the bike in a place that it needs to be stronger. For something like Goldwing, which is such a big, heavy bike. While we're on the topic of the front end, it is truly majestic. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about riding this Goldwing and what it feels like, probably as we talk about 6th gen here, but it is amazing. It basically, in the same way that a BMW telelever front end isolates the suspension action of the front wheel going up and down with the dive and weight transfer of a bike slowing down, the Goldwing Hossack style front end does the same thing, which means when you jump on the front brakes of a modern Goldwing, a current gen Goldwing, you don't get that front end dive. The fork doesn't go down like it does on most motorcycles because it's isolated all that pressure and the bike stays flat, level and composed, and yet leaves all of the suspension stroke available to soak up bumps while you're on the brakes or not. And it changes the whole sort of like mantra that a motorcycle company can have when they build the bike and when they adjust the geometry for how the bike steers. And in my opinion, it is amazing. I mean, it really is a remarkable system and like feels totally natural to use, but sort of completely eliminates some of the things that every motorcycle and every Goldwing up to that point had battled with.
So I think I want to let you speak a little bit to the pros and cons of the time you spent riding this bike. I think one of the things we failed to mention throughout the years is that the Goldwing, and I forget when this was introduced, and I'm sure someone will correct us, but it had reverse too. So like you could,
I think that might've been GL 1800.
Was it GL 1800?
Might've been 1500 though. I don't know.
And
I think Aries bike had it. Aries Winnebago
really?
had reverse.
I
think so. I have to check that. Yeah.
It used to, used to run off the starter, but the GL, the 6th gen, actually changed where one of the other things that they talked about, at the initial launch of it was the integrated, starter generator system. So like in further, like to cut weight, they did like the generator was actually what started the bike. And then that would operate the reverse functionality on the manual version. Whereas the DCT had like a walk, you could like in a walking mode, you could walk it forward, you could walk it back. But my point is in saying all of that, they were aiming to make it smaller and lighter and sportier and more compact. And they said, this is what the audience wants. And they said, well, this new engine gets better fuel mileage so that
20% more efficient. Is what they said.
That's what they
20%
claimed.
more efficient.
So because it's getting better fuel mileage, we can cut the capacity of fuel that has to carry down, which will cut down on weight. And Zach, you rode 6 tanks of gas in a 6 tank of gas article for a Honda Goldwing second look review that you published on Common Tread. And to your experience, what were some of the wins and what were some of the losses in riding the newest gen Goldwing?
Yeah. Well, to your point,
I read your article right before this podcast. So if you forget, I'd be happy to remind you of some of your pros and cons.
Well, a couple things here. One, yes, decreased fuel capacity was immediately a complaint from the Goldwing faithful and anyone who really appreciates what the bike is, because if you ride this bike at 75 or 80 miles an hour, it's still a big lump of mass to push through the air. And I average less than 40 miles per gallon, I think, on my 1,000-mile trip. And that means I had to stop before 200 miles. And this is the catch-22 of a touring motorcycle, is that if you run out of gas, or if you need to get gas, before you're uncomfortable, well, then the gas tank isn't big enough. And if you get uncomfortable and need to pull over when you still have gas in the tank, well, then the bike's not comfortable enough. There's really no winning that situation in my mind. A lot of people would say 150 miles, I'm ready to stop anyway. Some people would say, no, I want to go, Goldwing riders who do iron butt rallies and stuff, they've added extra fuel cells to Goldwing so they can go 500 miles without stopping for gas. But those are masochists. Within the bounds of reason, it is tricky to dial that in. But what I found was, it was sort of like, felt like I had to stop for gas kind of often. And I think that has been an ongoing complaint with this model. In addition to, for example, when this most recent gen came out in 2018, the top box did not fit 2 full-size helmets in all cases, in all circumstances. And that's like kind of a big no-no for a big touring bike, right? Like the top case should be able to swallow 2 full-face helmets, rider and passenger, and latch easily. And Honda actually addressed that in 2021 or 20 or something like that. Made the top trunk a little bit bigger just so that it would take 2 full-size helmets. So the updates have not been without some tribulations, I guess, right?
I don't have a Zach Quartz voice, so I'm going to steal the Spurgeon Dunbar voice for a second, because Zach Quartz is someone that likes to pass people on the highway. And one of his biggest complaints when he was riding the Goldwing was that he felt silly passing trucks and campers, only to have to repass them after stopping to refuel. So one of your biggest complaints in this article, and it's interesting, right? Because like
we all hate doing that, don't you? Don't you hate like buzzing along on your motorcycle at 75, 80 miles an hour and you pass the semi truck hauling lumber going 60,
the minivan,
the minivan, whatever,
right
and then you
lane,
pull over and you fill up your bike and you pass them again because you're like, you feel like a dope.
Yeah, I'm having to pass the same people. So you were averaging 38 miles per gallon, and you were getting roughly, like you were saying, around 190 miles. You were stopping for gas. So the fuel range was an issue for you as you were touring
exuberant touring that I did. I will say our buddy Spencer Robert did somewhat long distance test on a similar generation Goldwing. I forget what year exactly. And he averaged, I think, 42 or 44 miles per gallon. So like if you're a little gentler, and I admitted this in my article, that if you go 65 instead of 78, you get much better mileage. So part of that was on me. But in general though, it is just a phenomenal piece of engineering. I think along with like maybe the BMW K1600, which we'll talk about in a second here, or BMW R1300, R1250, R1200 GS, the Goldwing sits with a very, very, very limited number of bikes that just feel incredibly agile and precise and easy to use, considering how flippin' huge they are.
Yeah, when you're looking at how big some of these bikes are, this is not a a CBR 600, right? Like this is a big honking motorcycle.
And every time you look at any review for any era of Goldwing, everyone always says they handle great. GL 1200, GL 1500, GL 1800. Everyone says, oh, you get going 10, 15, 20 miles an hour. The pound just melt away. It just melts away. It doesn't feel like you're riding such a big bike. And I feel guilty or self-conscious in this era of Goldwing in the 6th gen saying like, the pounds melt away because I put it on the scales. We have one in house right now, about to do a daily rider on a Goldwing Tour 50th anniversary model, 852 pounds with a full tank on the daily rider scales. It is huge. It's huge. There's no two ways about it. And yet I cut through traffic. I ride up my gravel driveway. I just feel comfortable on it. It's ridiculous how easy it is to use.
So we were trying to find some power rating numbers because we said we threw out the original Goldwing
we didn't want to do an
torque
update
figures.
There, yeah.
And so if you're looking at, we found Cycle World had done a dyno run on a 2018. We were able to find the results
when this new gen first came out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so here's what's impressive. It's not the 97.8 horsepower that's impressive.
It's 100 horsepower. That's not that much for an 800-pound bike. We'll admit that.
108 foot-pounds of torque that peaks at like 1,200 RPM.
Correct. 1,200 RPM. And so this is what we were talking about this earlier.
Explain this to most people. Like if someone that's new to riding is looking at the torque curve graphic that we're showing on the screen and you're thinking to yourself, I don't get it. Like, why is that cool?
Yeah. what you do need a little bit of context. Normally, what you would see in a horsepower and torque curve like the one we're showing here is both of them sort of like rising as revs rise, and then torque usually peaks before horsepower, but they have a sort of like a relationship that seems understandable. This Goldwing torque curve is otherworldly.
Insane.
It doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous, and it's difficult to explain just how dynamic and fun and engaging a Goldwing engine is. But this horsepower and torque chart is a good little window into it, because if you think about the most torque that the engine can produce happens just above idle, just as you're letting out the, like, if you literally in second gear, you let the bike, say second gear, you let the bike, roll down and you slow down, decelerate until you're literally at idle in second gear. You're probably going 10, 12, 15 miles an hour. I don't know, something like that. And the bike's idling along, and you twist the throttle open, you have all of the torque that the engine can make right immediately. It's ridiculous. No other bike
going to snap your head back into your passenger, because you're going to have a passenger on a Goldwing and your helmet's going to smash into the front of their helmet. When is the last time you saw an inverted horsepower and torque curve?
Right? Like the torque curve goes up and then down. When
did you ever see more, like, when do you normally see more torque than horsepower?
Well, Harley's had that too. Like but
it's not common. Normally
it's not common. It's certainly not common for a multi-cylinder engine, you know? And this speaks to the changes that Honda made in the most recent engine, which is, like I said, more stroke and less bore, which typically means a little more torque rich character. But it's just to hang on the engine for just a moment too, aside from the numbers, aside from how we're telling you that an 850 pound motorcycle will accelerate quickly, because we know that sounds ridiculous. It's just so pleasing to use. I think it's the same reason that, like, if you've ridden in an old sports car, not that I have, come to think of it, but like, whatever, a 60s Mustang, or a I don't know, a Jaguar E-Type, or some sort of like beautiful classic sports car. And you roll along and you like on the throttle and going through the gears, and it sounds so satisfying and fun. And it's like not really a fast car anymore, if we're being honest, right? Old sports cars from the 60s, 70s, they're not really fast in modern terms, but it's just so pleasing. And that's kind of the way the Goldwing is. It just makes this beautiful noise. It's like this raspy and raw kind of like miniature Porsche 911 soundtrack. And it just pulls the bike forward is so satisfying to use, even if it's not as fast as a sport bike or sport naked or whatever. It's like, it's awesome. Did I do it some justice?
You did it some justice, and I'm proud of you. And you had mentioned, and I think this is a good comparison for people that might not really get it, but the comparison to like a Harley V-twin, right? Which prioritizes torque over horsepower.
Right.
I found an article on Common Tread called the title is Harley Davidson Milwaukee 8 117 horsepower and torque dyno results. And this is from back in like 2019. And even on a Milwaukee twin, max torque is like 108 foot-pounds, but it doesn't come on until max torque isn't until like 3,500 RPM.
Right. Which is low, but not as low as 1,200.
Right. And so like, I'm just looking at this. Actually, I'm reading this wrong. Max torque doesn't come on until like 4,700 RPM. Sorry, I'm reading this graph in real time, and I was looking at the horsepower numbers by mistake, but like the max torque isn't until, it's like later. So like the fact that like the torque is so, like all that torque is right there at idle. It's such a game changer if you've never ridden one of these before,
It is. It's wild. It's a cool bike. So we've waxed poetic long enough, perhaps. And all the new engine is 30 pounds lighter than the old engine. And like, if you didn't ride an old bike, or if you've never going to ride a Goldwing again, maybe you don't care. But I think all of these statistics and all this stuff that we're, excuse me, I said 30 pounds. It's actually 13 pounds lighter than the previous engine, just to be clear. All these numbers and stuff we're throwing at you is in the interest of you appreciating what the Goldwing is, even if it's not the bike for you, or, you know, you're not in the market, whatever. I think, Spurgeon, I was going to ask you the question, but I'll just go out on a limb.
Wait, before you ask me the question, I just want to back up. I want to admit in real time that I made a mistake. So yeah, the Milwaukee Twin, the peak torque hits right around 3,500. Milwaukee 8 hits right around 3,500 RPM. Still later, much later than what a Goldwing does. But I just want to, before the comments start rolling in,
before 20% of our audience starts.
The 20%, we'll get there later. Continue with the question you were going to throw at me.
Do you think, with all the changes that were made for the current gen Goldwing, that it has established itself as it carries the torch? Is it a true and valid and proud torch bearer of the Goldwing name, the new motorcycle, even though new front end and
absolutely
smaller,
100%,
okay.
100%. Okay. I think anyone, and I know that there's probably GL 1800, 2001 generation 1800 owners out there saying, no, they made it too small. They changed things I don't like about it. But it's the same way. If in 2001, you rode a GL 1500 back to back with a brand spanking new GL 1800, you were like, holy hell, this new bike is unbelievable. and it can't get any better. And then you fast forward to 2018 and you go out and you ride a GL 1800 with the 6th gen Goldwing.
Right.
You're like, holy hell, how did they make it better? And it's been around for 50 years. So my question is now, as we're 2018, 2025, we're 7 years into the newest gen. What do you think, if you could change anything, Zach, what's Honda going to do to introduce a 7th gen Goldwing? We're at the 50th anniversary of the Goldwing. It's been around for 50 years.
Right.
What do you do to improve upon this?
How do you keep adding brush strokes to the painting without making it worse?
How do you do it?
I don't know, man. It's hard to make predictions. I might add some like modularity to the, like you can't unclip the top box. It's not as like, have you ever used BMW Vario luggage that like stretches? Like it's sort of like, it's thinner and smaller luggage, and then there's like a lever inside that you can open the saddlebag. Yeah, and it expands and you can make it wider.
Yep.
I don't know, maybe something like that. Like the Goldwing could be a svelte, slightly smaller version of itself in this mammoth context. But it has like, the top case can like expand up to hold an extra 15 liters if you want to do that, but it can compress and sort of stay svelte if you're not going to do that. A little bit more adjustability, a little bit more adjustability and wind protection, but I'm reaching here, man. It's a pretty good bike.
You threw out a great transition. So let's stop right there.
Let's stop. I'll stop. Somebody stop me.
But you're talking about like, maybe they could come out with a convertible version, right? Like a convertible, like where it could be smaller and svelter, or it could be bigger and bulkier, right? And as we are recording this, Dustin Whelan, our Common Tread colleague, just got back from riding Honda's new NT 1100, which is, arguably it could be a replacement for an ST 1300, which is kind of like a smaller Goldwing V4 that went away, or the Silver Wing of the 80s. It is a parallel twin powered, smaller touring bike, right? And the real story here is that it's only available in a DCT version. So it's only available in the automatic transmission version. Right. And at the press launch for this, Honda is talking about the fact that if you look at the bikes where DCT is available, the Goldwing, the Africa Twin, and the Rebel 1100, 70% of sales are for the DCT only version. And when you think about the Goldwing, let's say that number holds fairly true. 70% of people are saying, I just want the automatic. I just want to hop on my Goldwing. I want to put it in gear and I want to cruise. And, as Dustin and I are talking about this with the NT 1100, I found it really surprising that they weren't worried about like leaving the other 30% out, right? Like if 70% of your sales are DCT,
right?
What about the other 30%?
You theoretically are leaving,
leaving
something on the table.
Yeah. And he was like, they didn't seem too worried about it for the American market. And they make that bike in a manual, but they're not bringing it into America. So like, as we're thinking about the Goldwing and we're thinking about touring and sport touring in 2025, we can look at the landscape a little bit, and let's like the competitors that are gone, like the ST1300 from Honda, the FJR 1300, the Concourse 14, like those were a little bit more on the sport touring side, and they haven't continued. So what do you see as a modern day, competitor for something like the Goldwing? Where does your list start?
I think that you certainly have to mention American V-twins, right? You got Harley Davidson Ultras and
the Super Glide Ultra, the Street Glide.
Right, there's the Street Glide, the Ultra Limited, and then the what's it called? Roadmaster, or not Roadmaster? Sorry, the Road Glide Ultra, maybe. The big top box touring bikes from Harley, and then an Indian has a Pursuit and a Roadmaster. They have two different. Is Pursuit the one with the top box, or is that the?
I think those both have top boxes.
Both top box. Anyway, Indian and Harley both have a couple of options for big top box touring bikes, and those are, in large part, the competition for the Goldwing, I think. But they're so different. The only other place there are a lot of competition that really exists, I think, is in BMW's lineup.
Pause before you go into BMW.
Okay,
Explain to the audience that might not be familiar, why are they different? Like, not just like aesthetically, like what is different about like looking at something like a Harley Davidson or Indian versus a Goldwing in your professional opinion?
Well, we talked a little bit about the engine. The Harley Davidson and Indian are leaning a lot on tradition. And
yes,
Harley Davidson and Indian benefit a lot from leaning on tradition. They have traditional V-twin engines that their brands have always had. And, but they're also a little bit hemmed in with tradition, I think, in the way that the bikes look and, the way that they function. I don't know if Harley Davidson or Indian buyers or the market or the culture of those bikes, not to lump it in too broadly, but like, would that group of riders accept a Hossack style girder, weird wishbone front suspension? I don't know. Like it does look a little funny. The Goldwing, Honda, if nothing else, is known for sort of blowing up its own ideas. And the Goldwing is just a lot more kind of like fluid as a product, I think. And that has led to much higher, not higher, it has led to much different technology being incorporated into the bike, and just the fact of the matter that it's a flat six engine, which is now part of Goldwing tradition.
Yeah.
So it is sort of heritage to some extent, but a flat six and a V-twin are really, really different styles of engine as far as the character and the way they deliver power and how, how smooth or rumbly they are. I think it's, I mean, the Goldwing is just like, I don't know. I know there are Harley people that'll say, oh, we have touchscreen infotainment and speakers and GPS and all that jazz too. I just think that the Goldwing is a heavier lean toward the cutting edge of the sort of like bleeding edge of like technology, both in chassis and mechanics and in electronics. And I think that just makes the bike feel a lot different.
I think that for I think that you're right in the fact that there's probably a bunch of HD or Indian aficionados that might be listening to this and saying, well,
honestly, we got liquid cooling now,
we have, yeah, but I think a lot of it's like, we have that technology too, right? And our bikes are sophisticated, but I think a lot of what you're looking at here, they're playing off of that tradition. And you said that earlier. I think that's the biggest key differentiator, whether you're looking at the Street Glide Ultra or the Road Glide ST, like it looks more like a big, powerful cruiser. Whereas the Goldwing, in a way, has somehow managed to maintain kind of like a sport touring aesthetic.
You keep using that word sport, but I don't think that's, I know what you mean. It does look
It looks
sporty.
it looks sportier than if you were looking at something like
arguably
a Street Glide or a Roadmaster, right? Like, and I understand that this is not, it's not the Concourse 14, it's not the FJR 1300, right? It's not that sport
completely
touring
different product
bike. It's
completely
not
different product. Yeah.
But I think as you're looking at the Goldwing, I don't know if people that are looking at a BMW, which we'll get here in a second, are cross shopping a Harley or an Indian. I don't know if the people that are looking at a Harley or an Indian are cross shopping a BMW, but is it possible that the Goldwing sits somewhere in between those two? Is maybe somebody that's considering a Harley or an Indian is looking at a Goldwing, and maybe somebody that's looking at a BMW is considering a Goldwing? Like maybe the Goldwing is somewhere in between those two versions of touring.
I mean, if you, because the Goldwing, like I said, because the Goldwing isn't as hemmed in by its own heritage or any motorcycling heritage, really, it's sort of like, it's kind of always been its own thing ever since the very beginning, as we talked about. I just think at this point, if someone said, what touring bike should I get? If that was the question, there is no question that you'd have to talk about a Goldwing.
Yeah.
You just have to. It's in some ways, it is the kind of king of the category. It's the quintessential touring bike because of all of the moves that Honda has made over the years to make it that. And like, does Harley Davidson's touring history go back further? Yeah. Harley Davidson touring history goes back to the beginning of the interstate system in the early mid 50s. And so is that worth something? Maybe, but I just think that it's arguably at the center of the conversation around touring. So
the other side of the conversation, we alluded to this, is BMW, right?
Yes.
Like when you're
and
thinking
BMW is
about,
it's an interesting, well, continue. It's an interesting data point.
Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit because we went back to those 1975 bikes, and like, we're talking about Harley versus Honda with the Goldwing. And then we brought up the RT, which was, a couple years later. So BMW was right there in the fight back in the mid 70s as well. And now all of a sudden, the bikes that you're really thinking about from BMW, if you're thinking about competition, it's the K1600 line, maybe the R1300 line, but I think the K1600 line is what you're thinking of.
The K1600s from BMW are 6-cylinder Grand Touring bikes. So
they're inline 6, right?
Inline 6, not a flat 6. Correct. Yeah. Inline right across the front of the bike. And that, we're not going to talk about that in great depth right now, but that is another truly delightful engine to use. Fabulous sound, fabulous power, a great motorcycle in general. And the thing is, BMW's natural evolution was to grow the K1600. It was K1200, K1300, then K1600 eventually, if I get my chronology correct. And I mean, the K line goes way back, but K bikes have evolved into this K1600 GT and GTL. And the K1600 GT is sort of like a standard Goldwing in that it doesn't have a top box. But it is a touring bike, but it is a little bit sporty too. It is huge and it is wide and it is heavy, but it is kind of sporty. And for that reason, BMW a number of years ago came out with the K1600 B and Grand America, which is the same K1600 platform, is the same 6-cylinder engine and platform, but it's supposed to be styled and to look like, and also the riding position is much more leaned back and much more sort of American style riding position and bodywork to sort of like target Indian and Harley Davidson a little bit. That bike is arguably the Goldwing competitor.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was like, you said that bike is styled to go after, the Harley Davidson Indian rider, but like in my mind, the K1600B and the K1600 Grand America are probably the closest in a direct competitor for the Goldwing.
They are, absolutely. And I think it's either a coincidence or it's not that those lines overlapped with the Goldwing, because the Goldwing has found itself a niche that works really well. And what's interesting about BMW, as a quick sidebar, is that BMW came out with the R18 a few years ago now. I don't remember when that was, which is a huge 1800cc boxer twin a la BMW, but it is very much supposed to be, it was aimed directly at Harley Davidson. I mean, the first R18 that came out was supposed to be a bigger, longer, burlier Harley Softail. And whether or not that's worked for BMW is not something we're going to talk about on this podcast, but BMW is kind of trying to dip its toes on both sides of have one foot in the pool and 1 foot in the hot tub with like trying to steal some Harley Davidson market share and some Goldwing market share, I think. But yeah, ultimately the K1600 is the closest competition to a Goldwing in my mind. And a good competition. And probably one of the reasons the Goldwing has continued to get better because that bike exists.
So I would just like to throw out this to our audience is I'm interested to hear, we've talked a lot about the Goldwing today and I've ridden a couple and Zach's ridden a couple, but we've never owned them. If you're a BM or if you're a Goldwing owner, or if you're an HD or Indian owner, or if you're a BMW owner for the larger K1600s or the larger, Ultras or Street Glides or Roadmasters or Pursuits, did you cross shop, right? Like if you're riding around with a Street Glide in the garage, did you consider a Goldwing? If you have a Goldwing in the garage, did you consider a K1600? And let us know. I'd really be interested. Shoot us an email to highsidelowside@revzilla.com. Leave us a comment on YouTube or on Spotify. And let us know, as an owner, where do you see the competition for this particular bike? Because I think as Zach and I were doing the pre-pro for this, it's really the BMW K1600 line. It's Harley Davidson and it's Indian. Those are the manufacturers doing big touring bikes right now. Can you think of anybody else that we're missing?
I mean, there've been stabs at this over the, like Kawasaki had the Vulcan 1700 or like big V-twin sort of quasi Harley thing. Yamaha did the same thing with that Star
Bolt
Eluder or no, not the Bolt.
The Eluder and the Intruder.
Whatever the big top box one was.
Moto Guzzi and what was it? The
MGX 21. I don't know if that was a little bit more of a cruiser and less of a touring bike, but yeah, there's been, people dabble in this space, other motorcycle companies dabble in this space. But it says something, I think, that these machines are the ones that really have footholds. And it's a hard market to break into. There's a lot of talk, has been a lot of talk for many, 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 many years, decades, about Japanese companies in particular, but even German companies, as BMW showed, going after a bit of the Harley Davidson market share, right? There have been in the heyday of Harley Davidson cruisers and touring bikes, they were selling so many of those bikes, and every motorcycle company that wasn't Harley Davidson wanted a piece of that. And, Honda has released plenty of Harley clones over the years, but it's plugged away with its Goldwing. And I think it's pretty cool that the Goldwing really does have it is a pillar of that category, not just an also ran.
I think it's interesting too, when we think about big touring, we have seen an evolution of big adventure bikes used as touring bikes too, right? Where you can get the top
Spurgeon,
box.
It's not an adventure podcast. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Let me finish. But that's not something that I really think is being cross shopped, right? Like I think there's probably a faction of motorcycles which have gone in that direction, but right. I don't think those people are looking at like an R1300 GS with full luggage cross shopping that with a Goldwing. I just don't think that overlap is there.
Yeah, and maybe there for a couple of people it is, but I think to talk about the Honda ST1300 and the Yamaha FJR 1300 and the Kawasaki Concourse 14. I think the reason those bikes are gone is ADVs, frankly. Yeah.
What about a Honda VFR? Am I allowed to? How far do we want to go?
That's even worse than ADV bikes. Don't bring that up. Come on.
I think is there anything we missed about Goldwings, or can we move on?
Almost certainly, Spurgeon. But
what are we asking for from that, Zach? If we missed anything, what do we want from our audience?
That's right. If you're listening here and you're a Goldwing aficionado, enthusiast, rider, whatever, and we missed something,
offended you,
offended you, said something completely wrong, please do. Keep your opinions to yourself, and we don't care. I got off script there.
Whatever you do, you can never write us an email.
Right. Feel free to write us at highside@revzilla.com, and we'll air corrections if we think they are worthy. But we hope that if you didn't know anything about Goldwings, that you got a greater, or maybe if you did know a little bit about Goldwings, you got a greater appreciation for the bike that has been produced for 50 years, which, my goodness, Spurgeon and I haven't even lived that long, and we are gray in the beard.
Congratulations to Honda for 50 years of the Goldwing. Quite a success.
It's quite a milestone. It is.
All right, now for everyone's favorite engine sound guessing game, brought to you by Akrapovich. I don't think Akrapovich makes gnarly exhaust for Goldwings, but
do they not?
If you
I'm
are
look it up right now.
Yeah, see if there's a Goldwing Akrapovich exhaust. If not, perhaps your motorcycle could be complemented by an Akrapovich, and you could make it sound a little bit throatier, a little bit gnarlier, a little bit wilder. But thank you to Akrapovich for sponsoring the engine sound guessing game with all their premium exhausts that they manufacture. The engine sound today, just want to throw out there. If you've never played before, Zach and I are going to play an engine sound. You can listen along at home. Scream out your answers at your stereo speakers. Producer Chase is swearing up and down. He's like, listen, he's like, I promise you, there's no correlation with the episode with this engine sound. I'm making it too easy for you. I'm trying to be, too mindful of what the episode is about and throwing engine sounds in there. He's promising us that the engine sound you're about to listen to has nothing to do with Honda or Goldwings. I don't know if we're going to believe him, but Zach, are you ready to start your engine?
I am ready to start my engine. Let's do it, Spurge. This, you know what the first thing I thought was?
No.
I'm gonna blow this. Someone is gonna be really offended because I'm gonna say it's X bike and it's gonna be Y bike, and I'm gonna look like an idiot, and all the owners are gonna be offended.
Do you have an immediate reaction of what you think this is?
I think it's a air cooled V twin.
I think it's an air cooled V twin too, but I have no idea.
How many degrees? Is it a 45 degree V twin? Is it a Harley Davidson? Or is it a 52 degree V twin? Like an Indian motorcycle? Or is it some other degree of V twin?
I'm trying to, like, the sound, like the starter sound before the engine even kicks on is throwing me for a loop, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Can we, do we want to do a hint first, or can we take one more listen?
Let's do a hint. We've laid some groundwork. Let's do a hint,
right.
and then we'll do it again.
Yeah, I want to hear this again. Okay, so this is an air-cooled V-twin engine.
Okay.
That's in this bike, and the bike was introduced in 2002. So let me make sure I read this hint correctly. The air-cooled V-twin engine in this bike was introduced in 2002. So the bike isn't necessarily a bike that was introduced in 2002, but the V-twin engine that's air-cooled was introduced in 2002.
Well, if it's an air-cooled V-twin, then there's one brand that, of course, stands out.
Harley Davidson.
And I am getting Harley vibes from the starter engine, and I'm getting I want to call out before we listen to it a second time. When the bike shuts off, you hear like a pretty specific little kind of intake suck. Like as the engine dies, you hear a little. Take a listen for it. I think I'm hearing Harley, and I'm trying to figure out what engine it is.
Let's listen again.
I don't know. I still have this weird tickle that it's a clone of some kind, and it's going to, it's going to be a.
Can I ask a question? And we don't think it's a Moto Guzzi?
No. It's the cylinder splay sounds too narrow. Moto Guzzi is a 90 degree V twin, which is a little bit like, it's a little bassier, a little more velvet to it. Not quite as harsh. That's my opinion.
And it's an air cooled V twin. So it's not like, what was the bike that Harley had that was like designed with like Porsche.
Oh, the
something.
V-Rod?
The V-Rod. And that was
liquid cooled.
That was liquid cooled, so it's not that.
Yeah. And also, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so do we get a second hit, or is it?
Well, you were also, yeah, we'll go to say, but you were also like, I didn't even think about like the Honda VTX 1800. When I took my MSF course in 2005, the instructor had a VTX 1800. So that bike would have been introduced around that time. Right?
But that would have been the whole bike introduced. And Producer Chase was clear that this is the engine that was introduced.
I'm trying to think if they used that engine in something else. Like, because there was the VTX 1300 and then there was the VTX 1800.
Right.
All right. So hang on. So let's go. Final hint. Let's see if this helps us at all, because the audience we're losing the audience. The motorcycle that we're listening to, not the engine, the motorcycle is named after an American city and a big win in that city. The motorcycle is named after an American city and a big win in that city. So it's not a VTX.
It's named after an American city and a big win. A big win. W-I-N. A big win in that city?
W-I-N. A big win in that city. So it's named after
someone's in their car right now and they're shouting at the stereo and they're like, "It's the Honda Gettysburg, you idiots!" And I don't remember. Did Harley name any bikes after a city?
It would have to be a Harley, right?
When we hear this, we're gonna be so sad at ourselves, right?
We have to keep talking, because otherwise it's going to be like
I just want to think. I don't want to talk. I just want to think and try to.
For the audience, that's what makes this so hard, is that like you're trying to you have to keep talking because it's a podcast, but then you're also trying to process the
I can't even think.
Daytona? It has to be. Was there a Daytona V-twin?
Was there a Daytona? Okay. You're like,
that's a city. You won the Daytona 200, like.
Or like, yeah, the named after a race course of some kind of Pikes Peak or Daytona or.
But the Pikes Peak edition was liquid cooled, so it wouldn't be the Ducati.
No, that's the Pikes Peak is wrong.
It's an air cooled V twin engine in this bike, so it does not say Harley Davidson. We're assuming Harley Davidson, an air cooled V twin engine.
I got a tickle that it's a clone. I like that it's not a Harley, which means
so like a big dog cruisers or
I don't know, or like a Honda or a yeah. Okay, we're gonna have to give up on this. You're right. People are getting bored with how dumb we are.
Was the Fury a city in America?
Please, Editor Matt, show a picture of a Honda Fury right now, just so everyone can bask in its glory. And if it's yellow, that's even better.
I don't know.
I guess. Were there any Indians in 2002? No. The company was kind of belly up then. Didn't they come back in 2008 or something?
Victory.
No, Victory?
Because they were
Victory's Polaris, like a win.
And then they closed Victory down to make Indian. Right?
Did they? No. Or I guess they kind of did. Yeah,
Polaris,
you're sort of right.
Polaris owned Victory, and then when they bought the Indian name, they shut Victory down.
All right, I guess I got to give up, man. We can't keep doing this to the audience. We don't know the answer, so let's just get the answer.
All right,
a famous
answer. We were if we would have had more time to just keep going back and
forth. We just had another 25 minutes to keep guessing. What is it? I still don't have the answer. What is it? Tell everyone.
Victory made a motorcycle called the Vegas Jackpot. This is a 2000. I don't think I would have ever known that.
Jackpot.
But the 2000. The answer of today's motorcycle is a 2008 Victory Vegas Jackpot. The audio was
sent in. Google that bike. I don't know what that is. I mean, I know what a Victory is.
Thank you to Zack, not Z-A-C-K, who is my Zack, but Z-A-C-H, for sending in a audio clip saying that after making fun of my father for purchasing this midlife crisis mobile. And then in parentheses says, don't tell him I said that. I fell in love with it and ended up buying it off of him. So I'm sorry, Zach, we just aired your secret. We'll have to have the editor just
apologies,
block that out. But it's a bone stock 50-degree V-twin engine.
50-degree V-twin. Okay, so my spidey sense was tingling that it wasn't a 45-degree, it wasn't a Harley V-twin. So I guess I'm proud of myself for that perspective. But but I didn't. I didn't have Victory Vegas jackpot. It would have taken me a really long time to get Victory Vegas. I did not remember that bike existed. So that was a good bit of trivia.
I forgot about Victory until you were like, did Indian exist?
Right.
For 2002.
You're right. We made some progress. We're not as dumb as everyone
thinks we
sometimes says we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is the fun way to say two things. One, for all of you writing in comments and emails, Zach Quartz, my co-host, spells his name with a K, not a C. There's a lot of people that spell with a C.
Not an H.
You're with a K.
Z-A-C-K, not Z-A-C-H. Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I appreciate you calling that out.
Yep. And so spell his name right, people. If you're going to say horrible things about him, at least spell his name correctly. If you want to play the engine sound guessing game, you can send us an audio clip of your motorcycle, the year, make, model, and any mods you made to it. We need it to be about 25 to 30 seconds long, starting off with it, firing up, let it idle, give it a couple good revs, let it idle, and then you can let it shut down. So that's what we're looking for if you want to play along by sending us your engine sound.
And just so everyone knows, it's spelled Spurgeon, but it's not pronounced idiot. For those of you that have been seeing him on the street lately, it's pronounced Spurgeon.
The amount of people that spell Spurgeon correctly but spell Zach with an H is funny to me.
Well, you got a nice recognizable name, Okay, we are moving on to our T-shirt winner. Which we will take from reviews on the Apple Podcast platform, of course, as well as Spotify comments and probably other places as well. Spurgeon, who's the winner this time around?
Winner today is Easy Money 99. Easy says, I am part of the so-called 20% of airtime, which was the reference to the fact that we read a comment a couple episodes back where Zach and I only talk about American V-twins 20% of the time. Easy Money 99 says, I ride an older Harley Davidson Dyna, but I love the podcast because I get to learn a lot about a lot of genres of motorcycles I don't have experience in. And it's my plan to at least get into ADV and dual sport riding to go beyond the pavement, get a little bit dirty. Please keep doing what you're doing. It's obviously worked for 10 seasons so far. So Easy Money, thank you. That was very kind.
That's very kind. Very nice. I will say a couple things here. One, just because we've done 10 seasons of this doesn't mean it's working. It's very cheap to produce a podcast. You can be a complete moron, as we've showed, and have a podcast. But I will say the reason we chose this, a couple reasons. My favorite part is that you are interested in other bikes, Easy Money 99, and I applaud you for that. That is good stuff. I wish more people, including myself sometimes, could be interested in bikes that we are not personally interested in buying or owning ourselves. So we appreciate you appreciating our sort of wide spectrum of coverage, and we hope that we can convince you to be a listener in season 11 as well.
So thank you to Easy Money. You can send your address and your shirt size to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. When you're picking that out, if you see the more than one shirt design up there, you go ahead and let us know. Again, we're waiting for these new shirts to hit the website. Production delays are a real son of a gun.
Indeed.
Zach, why don't you throw to the Highside, Lowside comment of the day?
Why don't I? This one comes in on Spotify from Brandon. Quite a simple comment for us to address, Spurgeon. Brandon says, and I quote, "How do I get my girlfriend to throw a leg over the bike and ride with me?" Spurge?
So this is something that I feel like we've talked about before in the podcast. But it was one that, Zach and I were thinking about, our significant others. And, I think the first thing we would want to say, Brandon, is don't force it. If she's not interested in throwing a leg over and riding on the back, it's not something you want to force, because if she's already nervous about it and scared about it, trying to force her to ride with you is probably just going to make it worse. So that's step one.
That's step one. Step two, buy a Goldwing. because no passenger will be more comfortable than on the back of a G-Wing.
But she's not going to want to be your girlfriend after that. So just be prepared.
That's right.
You're going to have to propose.
Buy a Goldwing at your own risk. Buy a Goldwing and a gold ring. Okay. So that's good. Good advice in general, of course.
Did you come up with that? Did you come up with that just right there in the moment? You're so good. You're so good.
Right. Oh, thanks, buddy. Good advice in general, not to force motorcycling on anyone as a rider or a passenger. We hope that your GF will join you, Brandon. But it might have to be her own journey.
I think it's worth the conversation too. Like what is it that's stopping her from riding? Is it that she doesn't have the gear?
Is it you, Brandon?
Yeah, but it might be. I mean, like we've talked about this in the past where like the number one, the biggest responsibility you have outside of like learning how to ride correctly is making sure that you are being fair to your passenger. Your passenger doesn't have any way of controlling the motorcycle, right? So it's not about trying to show them how fast you are, or trying to, show them you can do a wheelie with them on the back or any of that stuff. It's about making them comfortable so that they want to continue to ride with you. So, I would just have a conversation. Like what is standing in the way of your girlfriend wanting to ride on the back of a motorcycle, and kind of address those issues and start there.
Well said. Okay, Spurgeon, we're just about at the end of the road here talking about the Goldwing on another episode of Highside, Lowside. This is where we remind you that you can watch on YouTube, leave a comment in the YouTube comment section if you like. You can send us an email with a question or a comment to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com, where you can also send us engine sounds. As Spurgeon said before, you could share this podcast with your friend who thinks that Goldwings are silly and dumb and no one's ever liked them. Well, 640,000 people
disagree.
Usually collectively wrong. Yeah, exactly. They disagree. So what do you think, Spurge? Talk about 50 years of Goldwing and so on and so forth. What's your big takeaway from today's episode?
My biggest takeaway comes from just a moment ago when you tried to call me an idiot and I didn't take the bait. And I'm really proud of myself because I just kept going with the podcast. I didn't derail anything and say, how dare you? I sat and I let you call me names in front of the entire audience, and I let it go.
I just feel bad that when people see you on the street, they mispronounce your name. That's all I'm saying.
I've changed my ways. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm not going to derail anything by talking about you calling me an idiot for minutes on end. What was your big takeaway here, Zach, out of all of this?
I don't know. I don't know if I have anything super interesting. I will say, I think when you talked about the technology and innovations that the Goldwing introduced over the years, we talked about cruise control. I'm not saying that these are things that the Goldwing has only ever had or had first but these are pieces of technology that were incorporated into a Goldwing that were oftentimes not mainstream in the world of motorcycling, such as a reverse gear, air suspension, cruise control, an airbag. These things haven't all, the tape deck, a CD player, whatever. These things haven't all stuck around in the world of motorcycling. But when we can look at a model that has been around for as long as the Goldwing has, and has its own kind of environment and ecosystem that has created, because there have been so many versions over so many years, you get motorcycling through a different lens. You get it sort of an interesting snapshot of what motorcycling has gone through and the things that have stuck and the things that haven't. And I think that's so interesting to look at in the timeline of a single model of motorcycle, but learn so much about the history of motorcycling itself. And, if the Goldwing only gives you that today and none of the other stuff we talked about, I think that's valuable.
That was the most interesting part of the research for me, was like looking at what the landscape was in the mid 70s. And, I was reading some articles about Craig Vetter and, the collaborations with Honda about the Windjammer fairings, and like to think about how far we've come in 50 years of motorcycling, where now you can walk on the dealership floor and you can pretty much buy whatever you want to buy, whatever weird bastard child of a motorcycle is in your brain, there's going to be something that gets pretty close to it. And really that wasn't the case in the mid 70s. You kind of had to shift and augment and create your own version of something based on what the platform was. And it's really interesting to see how much of that's changed with the motorcycling landscape we have now. And it's really a great time to be a motorcyclist. You can walk in and you can buy a big old honking touring bike like a Goldwing, or you can go in and you can buy a Grom 125. the spectrum of just Honda's lineup in
Honda
2025,
alone, yeah.
just Honda alone in 2025 is freaking believable. It's so cool. It's such a great time to go out and get a motorcycle if you don't already ride.
And if you do already ride, maybe you're itching to go on a ride right now. So we're going to let you go.
Go do it.
But thank you so very much for hanging out. And we will see you next time on Highside, Lowside.